talk about your background a little bit, Amy. I know some folks that haven't heard who you are, what you're about, where you're from,
Sure.
that type of
So,
stuff.
I am a low carb and keto friendly nutritionist. And like a lot of people, I wasn't born knowing about this, and I got into it because of my own issues with weight. I used to be heavier, and I never had morbid obesity. I wasn't quite that big, but I was chubby, and I was chubby despite exercising plenty and eating what I thought was a good healthy diet, lots of, whole grain cereal and skim milk. And I really spent so many years beating myself up and blaming myself. What's wrong with me? I need to work out even more. And I stumbled upon the Atkins diet. That was my entry into all this. And I tried it, and lo and behold, it worked. And I lost weight while getting to eat delicious food and not depriving myself. And I like to joke, although it's not really a joke, that I'm a coffee junkie. And I remember the first time I put heavy cream in my coffee instead of milk, and it was so thick and rich. And I was wondering, am I going to have a heart attack right away? Like, am I going to feel my arteries clogging? And of course, now I've been doing this for a long time now, over 15 years. And in that time, what I've learned is that this way of eating, whether we're talking about low carb, keto, carnivore, any variation of carbohydrate restriction, is so powerful for so many health issues. I mean, your community has seen complete reversal of things that are otherwise completely a mystery to the medical world. They're completely irreversible. And so weight loss is, even though that was the reason I got started in this, I've come to appreciate that weight loss is one of the most minor things that this way of eating can do for you. I mean, it can really radically change your life. And oh, you might lose a couple of pounds along the way.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I really try to emphasize, and it's not that this is the only way to do it. Clearly, there's a lot of ways to lose weight. There's a lot of ways to get healthier. But what we are seeing, I think, to a larger degree, with this sort of approach, is improvements in all these other sort of issues outside of weight loss. People talk about it's only about calories and going into caloric deficit is what happens. But I see people that aren't overweight. I see people that actually end up gaining weight, maybe because they need to, and they still resolve health issues, whether it's autoimmune things, gastrointestinal things, mental health issues. So I think that to me is a more fascinating thing, when it comes to all
Yeah.
this stuff. Well, let's
And I
let's
think it's also really important. Like, this is such a personal issue for me, in that look at all the people that have all these massive health problems that are not overweight. And yet in our society, we have such a fat bias and such a size bias. We're constantly blaming, oh, you have diabetes because you're overweight. You have gout because you're overweight. Well, never mind all the slender people that have all those same problems, even something like joint pain, that you would think, well, only heavy people get joint pain. Well, then how come joint pain tends to really, really decrease very quickly before people lose a significant amount of weight? So it's weight is just one symptom, I think, of the larger metabolic disturbance.
Yeah, one of the arguments that's coming as a background, as a background as an orthopedic guy, we would see, I mean, I would see plenty of overweight people that needed knee replacements. I mean, it was just, and so you would just associate that, but you don't consider the metabolic thing. But then you think, well, wait a minute, we have people with finger arthritis, we have people with neck arthritis. How does
Right.
weight impact that in a mechanical standpoint? It's not like you're walking on your fingers or walking on your head, or
Right.
your head swells to 3 times the size. I mean, it doesn't happen. And so yet we still see this. So we're clearly seeing the metabolic effects of, weight acting in an inflammatory fashion. And it's good to see some articles coming out looking at inflammatory cytokines and insulin and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
because the book's called End Your Carb Confusion. So let's get into that a little bit. What does that mean? I mean, why are we confused about carbs? I mean, this diet advice is extremely confusing, I'll have to say, but what are people confused about?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked, because I was hoping I would get a little opportunity to say this. You know how you kind of have a famous line, just eat a damn steak. When people are like, well, what should I eat? Do I have to eat this? And you're like, just eat a damn steak. We could boil our book down to just stop eating the damn carbs. It's when I was new to this, there was the Atkins book, and there was the book Protein Power, and there was maybe one online forum. Facebook didn't even exist. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, none of that even existed when I was new. You got a food list and you followed the list and it was fine. And over the last few years, keto and low carb have become so popular, which is great. But with all the information comes a ton of misinformation and nonsense. And we've been complicating a very clear signal with a lot of unnecessary noise. And so our book is really to help people drown out the noise and home in on the signal. What do I actually have to do to make this work? And maybe all the other stuff can help a little bit on top of that, but just cutting way back on carbs is going to get you most of the way to where you want to go, whether that is weight loss or better blood sugar, better blood pressure, more energy, all of that stuff. And it's amazing to me how complicated this has become. I can't imagine being new to this now and trying to sift through all of the YouTube channels and all of the blogs and everything. And I'll check my phone. I don't know where Dr. Westman is, but he's been doing this in his clinic for over 20 years. And he has patients from all walks of life, every income level, every race, every level of education. He has to present this way of eating in a way that everyone can understand and that everyone can afford and do. So if you have the budget to go get your organic, pasture-raised, grass-fed meats, do it. If all your budget fits is the tube of ground beef from the discount store, that's great too. Because the number one most important thing is to just cut back on the carbs. And the extent to which you have to cut back depends on your situation. The sicker you are, the further you are away from the health you want to have, the more radical an approach you need to get there.
One of the things I see when I'm in this group every day, 7 days a week. And so when I look at the demographic here, it's not a bunch of 20-year-olds. I mean, we have people that generally, and we've got some younger folks in here, but we generally see people 40 plus. I mean, that seems to be the demographic. And I think there's some damage that takes place over time before you finally figure it out, before you're willing to figure it out or willing to admit it, because we get these people that are metabolically healthy in their early mid-20s, exercising, saying I can eat all the carbs I want. Why are you demonizing carbs? And let's talk about that, because is there an age progression with our tolerance to carbohydrates? Why can't we just restrict calories? What's the difference there?
Well, I do think there is younger people do tend to have a lot more carb tolerance, but of course, in today's day and age, we're seeing little kids with fatty liver, and that's certainly not coming from alcohol. We're seeing toddlers with type 2 diabetes. These kids are being programmed in the womb. Dr. Jason Fung talks about they're marinating in insulin, in utero, but I do think as we age, our carb tolerance does tend to decrease, and that's partly because we're less active. Most people, unless they're actively trying to build and maintain muscle mass, they're losing muscle mass pretty quickly over the years. And so the less muscle you're carrying, the less room you have for the less, the fewer sponges you have, so to speak, to mop up glucose out of your blood. So yeah, I do think people generally find that as they age, they can't eat what they used to eat when they were younger, and didn't have a problem with it in their 20s, but quote unquote, all of a sudden they hit 40 or 50 or 60 and they start packing on the pounds.
Yeah. So what are the the biggest confusion issues? So let's talk about can we stratify carbohydrates a certain way? Obviously, I mean, most people say added sugar, high fructose corn syrup, ultra processed foods. And then I guess, I don't know if you guys get into like artificial sweeteners much in the book. I like I said, I haven't had a chance to look through it very thoroughly, but if you guys, this is the book here, I'll show it again. It's called End Your Carb Confusion, Dr. Eric Westman, and then of course, Amy. And it is, I guess, Victory Belt, who, like I say, published my book too. So anyway.
Okay, so
Yeah.
in answer to your question, we do cover all the carbs, because here's the thing: as much as we all love keto or carnivore or whatever version of this way of eating we do, there are millions, if not billions, of people around the world that eat starchy foods and eat fruit, and they're healthy and they're lean, they're fit, they age gracefully with their cognitive faculties intact. So we can't really make a blanket statement outright and say that carbs are killing you, or, you know, beans and rice and fruit are poison. But we make it very clear in the book that if you are living with a condition being driven by chronically high insulin or metabolic dysfunction, those kinds of foods that might work really well for someone else do not work for you. You can't, well, but they're eating fruit. Okay, that's them. That's not you. You're in a very different medical, metabolic situation. And we of course talk about the very, very low carbohydrate foods, so to speak, the non-starchy vegetables. You know, I've always hated the phrase fruit and vegetables because that makes it sound like eating a bowl of grapes and mangoes and apples is no different than eating some sauteed spinach or some steamed broccoli, when we know these things have radically different effects on your blood sugar and your insulin and all that. And so we just explained that the more severe your metabolic or medical situation, the more strictly you have to restrict the carbohydrate in order to correct your issues. Once those issues are corrected, you might be able to reintroduce strategically small amounts of higher carb foods if you want to. We also make it very clear that you don't have to. You can live in strict ketosis for your whole life. We also even mention you might actually not need any plant foods, like that might be okay if you just want to eat nothing but meat for your whole life. And but we are very realistic. We need this to work in the real world. So with knowing that in a small percentage of people, they might have an exaggerated response to things like Splenda or erythritol and stevia and monk fruit. As a transition, I mean, in an ideal world, we would never want anything sweet. We would completely break our need and our desire for anything sweet. If you can't do that, it is much better, and I will fight any dietitian, any nutritionist, any doctor. If you have a raging type 2 diabetes or morbid obesity, you are absolutely better off drinking a diet soda than drinking the real thing, or having some sort of sugar-free candy than having the real thing. Hopefully over the long term, you don't want any of that, but as a first step, let's at least get off the thing that is jacking up your blood sugar and insulin all day long.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, and obviously there's different artificial sweeteners. Some people really, the sugar alcohols, I mean, erythritol seems to be the one that has the least GI effects, but I mean, like sorbitol, maltitol, some of those things are just disastrous for people on the GI side. You know, it's controversial, but I mean, I don't think people would argue saying that from a insulin glucose response, you know, some of these things are better than others. Certainly stevia, monk fruit, and some of those others tend to be better. What about high fat? I mean, is there a problem? I mean, a lot of people say, hey, you know, if we can eat the carbs if we don't eat the fat. And there's a whole, I mean, that's the kind of the vegan mantra, or some of these people that are treating diabetes, you know, with, I mean, just extremely, extremely low fat diets that would be, I think, challenging to follow. At least, well, for me, they would be to get your total fat under 10% of your diet. What are your thoughts there with, and some people mentioned this thing called a Randall cycle where, you know, fat and carbs together cause problems?
Yeah, I do think there's some truth there, because the people who do, you know, you can't do both, right? The high-ish carb, high-ish fat is like the metabolic kiss of death. If you're going to eat a lot of fat, you cannot eat a lot of carbs. If you're going to eat a lot of carbs, you're probably better off not eating a lot of fat, because you can do a very, very low fat diet and lose weight, and even you can reverse diabetes that way. I don't recommend it. I think you'll be hungry. I think you'll be miserable. I think over the long term, your risk of nutrient deficiencies is much greater than if you're eating a higher fat, higher protein diet. So I do believe that there's a lot of truth to what they call the personal fat threshold. So once your fat stores in your sort of subcutaneous body fat are full, your body has no place else to store excess incoming energy it's going to shove it anywhere it can, including in your liver, in your pancreas. This is when the metabolic dysfunction happens. So the thing is, though, what flips the switch from you burning mostly all those carbs to burning mostly the fat is the amount of carbohydrate in your diet. It's how high your insulin is. So if you're eating a very, very, very low fat diet, then even if you're eating a lot of carbs, there isn't a whole lot of fat to be stored. So if you're eating a lot of carbs, but you have a mostly carb-based metabolism, I don't think it's so great, but you're probably not going to run into the same kinds of problems you would if you're eating the carbs and also fat, right? Because it only takes a little bit of carbohydrate to make a carb-based metabolism in which you're going to be storing that fat. So does that make sense? I mean, I think very low fat diets work, but I think there's a reason they're really, really hard to stick to. And I think there's a reason most of us failed if we ever tried to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I lost weight on a low fat diet, initially when I went from whatever I was, 280, 290 pounds, dropping down to 230 when I decided I didn't want to be a giant throwing athlete anymore. But I was pretty miserable by the end of it. I certainly would say that. I think I lasted about 3 months and I was like, I can't do this anymore. Let me ask you about, so we talk about, classically, we see little sort of glucose response to fat, protein in the middle, carbs, obviously it's kind of we look at it as an acute up and down. Protein's a little slower and fat is minimal. There's data coming out there showing that maybe the fat is slow, but when you combine it with these other foods, it just prolongs that area under the curve. And so that fat does indirectly have an impact on your glucose and likely on insulin. Do we touch on that at all?
I don't think we mentioned that in the book, but I think, because we've all heard that in order to reduce the glycemic impact of a meal, you should add fat because it helps to slow that absorption. But I think you're right. Even if the total rise in the glucose or insulin is lower, it is a prolonged effect. So the area under the curve is the same. You get the same amount of exposure, so to speak, to glucose and insulin, even if it's not as high, it's lower, but it lasts longer. So you can't pick and choose. I feel like you either have to do low carb or low fat, and you can't pussyfoot around in the middle of like low-ish carb, low-ish fat. I think that's really what got us, a lot of us anyway, into trouble years ago.
Yeah, but that's the balanced diet. I mean, this is the whole thing. It's like, I believe in all things in moderation, and you know.
Well, so here's the issue too, though. Balance, of course, is such a nonsense word, but they've even done they did a study out of Israel, I think a few years ago, where they fed people the exact same food and the exact same amount, but their glucose and insulin responses were radically different. So we can't have blanket even the glycemic load and glycemic impact are nonsense, because if two people eat the same food, but for one person their blood sugar rises 80 points and one person the blood sugar doesn't move at all, how can we trust those kind of recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty individuals, and I think as more people have access to things like CGMs and just even plain old blood glucose monitors. Looks like Eric is here. Eric, I don't know if you were able to unmute yourself. Welcome, thank you.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you perfect. So anyway, for you guys that don't know, Dr. Eric Westman is a pioneer in this field. He's been doing this. I think he was doing this back in, what was it, the 1920s or something like that, when they were doing the first epilepsy? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, well, I'm really 120 years old.
Well, you look great. No, you look great. No, but anyway, welcome. And I was telling, you've got the book out. I got a copy of it last night. I haven't had a chance to obviously read it just yet, but I'm looking forward to it. But
I have mine.
You got yours too? Oh, you got it. There you go. Yeah. I've got food on my cover. You guys, I don't know if this is a fasting or there's no food. No, I'm just kidding. Amy was kind of introducing some of the stuff and, talking about her background. And I just, one of the things I was just talking about is, the fact that fat does seem to have a role in glycemic control. It kind of flattens things out though. It kind of extends out, like particularly when you mix fat with carbs, and we know that, fat slows down digestion. You have this slow burn rather than this quick onset and offset type of thing. But I mean, is that people mention the Randall cycle. I hear that from time to time. Do you have any input on that sort of situation where fat and carbs together are the ultimate disaster? You can, if you just eat fat, I guess protein's going to have an effect. Obviously, you just can't eat just fat. I mean, you got to have some protein there. So how do those things all come together?
Well, yeah, I think we're going beyond what's called settled science, right? I mean, I think you're probably observing. We've talked before, and thanks for having me on today. What's known as dogma, the settled science, is not what we're seeing, right? I mean, so you're going to be observing changes that have not been put into research publications, or even the world experts will say, no, that can't be true, so I don't know. I guess I hold out that I'd like to see research that goes beyond the typical carbs and glucose and protein and glucose and mixing and matching. And I think if you want to say that it's the combination, the donut of the carbs and the fat is the worst, I think it's a valid thing to say. But I'm not sure that we have controlled trials to look in detail at all these things, although individuals armed with a glucose monitor and watching what they're eating can figure it out for themselves. You're gonna, and that's really all that's important for you, right? I mean, so as a researcher, I'm trying to make generalizations across lots and lots of different people, and even then we might do a study with 30 people in it, but it's only these 30 types, these people's metabolisms at play. So I'm curious to, and I'm, of course, as you know, I'm supporting your foray into the research world, which is fantastic. And so I think those are generally true, that it's the carbs and the protein and fat kind of settles things out.
Yeah, I mean, there's something, I think it's called the Warsaw Fat Protein Index or something like that. And, this is more for even type 1 diabetics. And they talk about how to dose for protein and fat, because, a lot of traditional diabetes medicines count your carbs. What if you don't eat carbs? And it's kind of like, do you get a glycemic effect? And I think the type 1 diabetics will say, yes, you do.
Yeah,
and we have to account for that. And I've seen the formula is something like for every 100 grams or 100 calories of protein and fat is equal to 10 grams of carbohydrate, which would be 40 calories. So it's like a 2.5 to 1 or something like that. Interesting. But I mean, it's something that's out there.
But formulas like that are going to be taking averages, and
right, sure,
there'll be individual variation. I mean, you practice clinical medicine. I mean, you're taught in the textbook, and then there's the real world, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course, that's a nice thing that we have more and more tools and with CGMs and stuff like that. But Amy was, I guess one of the tenets of the book is this should be simple. This should be accessible to everyone, regardless of income level, socioeconomic status, cultural biases and stuff like that. And I think that's an important aspect of what I try to put out there as well. I know you've been doing this. You've been on the trenches for 20 years or so, and seeing what works. And so if we boil it down, Amy said, well, let's cut the carbs back. And that's, kind of, like I was saying, carb confusion. I'm personally not that confused by it because I don't really eat any, but I mean, it's kind of
that makes it simple.
It makes it very simple, and it's less confusing in this audience. But what are you seeing? Like, someone is, first of all, I mean, in the mainstream press, this keto diet, these low carb diets, they're not sustainable. No one can do them for more than 6 months. They help you lose weight, and beyond that, you're putting yourself at risk. What do you say when you hear that, or you see that? And you see that all the time in the media.
I mean, I'll think for a moment and then say, I've done it 20 years. Can't, so it's certainly easier than ever to do it. And I think you just have to come back with the truth, which is, well, some people can, can everyone, and, end your carb confusion. Sure, it's simple if you don't eat any carbs, but there are a lot of people, including like my family members and my brother, who was the athletic guy, playing college basketball, and he could always eat carbs. and be healthy, and you know, age caught up with them a bit. But this also explains how some people can eat carbs and some can't, and explains the metabolic differences in general terms, and then gives people a roadmap to figure out where they should start. But you know, we have this knowledge, Shawn, and then there are people who just are never going to do it, right? I mean, that the penetration of getting people healthy is going to have to be more than keto, right? It's going to have to be more than carnivore. So why not? I mean, as a leader, you have to, you know, stick to your guns and say, yes, you can do it, and this is great. But to share what we know with everybody, I'm relaxing the rules a bit and saying, well, you know, if you just cut out those sugars, you're going to be metabolically better. And so that's the idea of this book, to share the knowledge that we have in the kind of keto carnivore echo chamber with other people, so that they can get the health benefits without worrying about going all in. I mean, I'll even joke when someone looks at me, you know, how long do I have to do this? I say, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to lock you in a keto prison. You know, I'm not going to lock you up. I'm going to teach you something, and then you can figure out what to do when you get to your goals. So, so yeah, I'm relaxing the strictness to allow for more people to have access to the information, and cutting across socioeconomic level. I mean, that's kind of a passion of mine, which being in Durham, North Carolina, we have a diverse set of patients, and I've been in an insurance Medicare, Medicaid system for 20 years. So I've been trying to figure out how to get this to work if you don't have a lot of money, if you don't have a lot of time. And, but yeah, the simplest thing is just not eat carbs. I mean, for heaven's sake, plants put dangerous things in their leaves so that mammals won't eat them, you know?
Yeah, and I think that, you know, like I said, most people, myself included, that ended up where we are here in this sort of offshoot, this carnivorous offshoot, got here through a more, you know, expanded sort of thing. You know, we might have come through low carb, paleo, keto, and then just kind of funneled down. And I think, you know, you're going to catch more people with a little more open thing. And again, I try to stay away from dogma. I tell people, hey, if it works, it works. You know, add stuff in if you can. You know, figure it out. You know, you get it. You know, it's nice to have a tool that, you know, this works for me really well. If I need to go there, I can go there. If, you know, or if I need to stay there, I need to stay there. But at the same time, you know, if you make it overly restrictive or overly complicated, you know, it's, you know, people, I mean, you know, from your experience, if you give somebody 1,000 calculations they've got to do, they're never going to do it. I mean, it can't be doable.
Not many, that's right. Well, and so my method, knowing that I'm a researcher and I can write research papers well and design things like that, that I roped in Amy to help with the writing. And because we were on the same sheet of music in terms of trying to simplify things, Amy operationalized the wording of most of the book. And so I'm really happy to have her involved. And at times it's, you know, the wit of Amy Berger in the book with while it's my, you know, it's a collaborative effort. And the food lists that we've come up with really are from the research setting. But did it occur to you that we didn't have a single scientific reference in it?
You know, it's kind of funny. I like I said, I just literally got the book last night, so I didn't have a chance to really look at it. I was looking at it's kind of funny because I had, you know, James DiNicolantonio on the other day, and he just has a new book, and it literally has 2,000 references, and it's like 200 pages of reference. I'm like, okay, no one's gonna read all those, first of all.
That's what James does. James is like,
yeah, I'm just like, the more references I have, the better. I don't know if that makes it any better or worse. I mean, I think,
well, there's the old saying that applies to this, is that methinks he protesteth too much. You know, if you have to put 1,000, you know, I don't need a reference. You just need to try this for a week.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And I think,
and we also sort of operated from the perspective of this. We deliberately wrote this book in very plain English. It's not that it's scientifically sound, but there's no, there's no SAT words in this book. You don't need to sit with our book and also a dictionary, in your other hand. And I was very nervous about not having it. I'm like, you don't want to have any references. You don't want to back anything up. But then, Dr. Westman kind of reminded me, we don't say anything controversial in this book. We don't say anything controversial because we don't say that carbs are killing you, but we certainly don't say red meat and saturated fat are killing you. No one can argue with anything we're saying in here. And this is in my blog and in my own YouTube videos, I try to explain things the way I would want someone to explain them to me if I was new to all this. And that's what we tried to do. Here's the basic thing to get you started. Frankly, this book is not for the people that have been doing low carb or keto or carnivore for 5 years or 10 years. And, if you already know more about insulin than Ben Bickman does, this book is not going to teach you a whole lot that's new. Or, there's literally the word, the abbreviation mTOR does not appear once. The word autophagy does not appear once in this book. And that doesn't, but so it's a great beginner book, but it's also, end the confusion. This is also for people that have been doing this for 2 or 5 years and are completely overwhelmed by the craziness that has overtaken. If you need a reminder and to reorient yourself back to the very basic, simple kernel of what works, this is for you too. Because, okay, great, there's autophagy, there's mTOR, there's this, there's that. Most of it doesn't really matter, right? Most of it, when you just get the carbs out of your diet, whether you do strict carnivore or whether you just do keto or lowish carb, most of that stuff becomes irrelevant. It really does. And I feel like a lot of these things we talk about with various different, even fasting or the sauna or this and that, a lot of that stuff is designed to mitigate or undo metabolic damage. But if you're not inflicting all that damage in the first place from, pardon my language, a shit diet, an SHIT diet, you don't have to undo it. You don't have to take curcumin supplements and you don't have to take resveratrol supplements to undo all the harm you've done when you're not doing the harm in the first place. Like a lot of the research that backs up or seems to back up a lot of that stuff is done in people eating a regular garbage diet. What if your diet is not garbage? What additional benefits do all of those things do on top of what you're already accomplishing just by keeping your blood sugar and insulin low most of the time?
Yeah, I think this message of simplicity is very powerful because like I said, it is maddening, anxiety provoking. I mean, there's so many people that just their head wants to explode, and it's just information overload and it's stress. And I think sometimes doing that, and as Eric knows and Amy, in the real world, that just doesn't work well. I mean, it's nice to talk about it on Twitter and talk about it on a podcast, but when it comes to the rubber hits the road, just give me a simple plan to follow and gosh, make it easy. And I'm not worried about how many hours I have to fast to turn on autophagy and how many, grams of leucine I have to eat to turn on mTOR. I mean, it really is, humans, gosh, our grandparents didn't think about this stuff and they were arguably metabolic healthier than we are. They had a hell of a lot less access to some of the science and the data and the infinite number of lab tests we can now do on ourselves. I mean, some of that I think is going to, it's nice to have some of these tools, but at the same time, it can be, a problem at the same time. I was just kind of glancing through the book. I saw that there's a progression. Looks like there's somewhere in there's a progression of, you got a little checklist on 20 grams, 50 grams, 100 grams or something. What's the story on that? What is the overarching theme on this book on how to do things, I guess?
Yeah, well, again, it's translating, and it's no surprise that Amy, it doesn't surprise me. Amy speaks Korean, I speak French, and learned it, once. We translate, so we don't really say insulin resistance, check your glucose and insulin. What we've done is we have a checklist of the manifestations of those problems. So instead of saying, go to the doctor, get a glucose and an insulin test and get a glucose tolerance test and all this, we say, do you have polycystic ovary syndrome? Do you have diabetes? Do you have the clinical outcomes of the insulin resistance or carbohydrate intolerance. And then you get assorted into, one of three categories. And I had to accommodate for, my brother, my Adapt Your Life business partner, who, they're athletic, they're eating 100 carbs a day, but, it's healthy carbs. And so we will let people kind of figure out themselves where to begin. And then based on whether you get the results you want, you're feeling well, you may change between the different phases, we call them, or different groupings. And yeah, it roughly comes to 20 or below, 50, 20 to 50, so 50 or below, and then 150 and below. And that accounts for the person who has no insulin resistance, is young, is active, that with that said, there are some people who perform better on a keto diet, like Zach Bitter, who holds the 100-mile race record, the ultra marathon. But most people aren't going to do that. In fact, I had a medical student on. I'm at Duke, and I'm an associate professor there, and I have medical students rotate through my clinic on a rotation that I'm the supervisor of. And he did a project because he is an ultra marathoner. And so he's surveying all these ultra marathoners and getting like hundreds of replies to see what they're eating. And I got to peek in, and most aren't, I would say the vast majority are eating carbs, and they're doing, so we have like the peak. We know some people who can not eat carbs and do great, but I think we wanted the message to be broader than, yeah, you just got to do that, because again, there are a lot of people who just never will, right? Cut out the carbs totally.
Yeah, and for many people, they don't need to. I mean, I think that's fair enough. I mean, like I said, we have some people here that are treating, in many cases, some pretty significant issues, and it does seem to help for whatever weird reason.
Yeah.
It's still trying, like I said, we still speculate on what's going on.
So I guess I got one last thought, if you, sorry, that there's more to it than just insulin resistance and carb restriction, clearly, because watching some of the stories that you've assembled, there's got to be something about toxicity and autoimmunity and all that goes beyond insulin resistance. But that's going to, cast the net around most of the metabolic problems, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Amy, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that with, the three levels of carb intake that Dr. Westman was mentioning, the more, like I said earlier, the further you are away from being healthy, the stricter you have to be and the lower carb you have to be. But even our highest level is 150 grams a day or fewer. And so that, to us, that's really high. But compared to what the average person eats, even that highest level is lower carb. It's not keto, but it's lower. And but we also do recommend that even if when you're filling out that checklist where it points you to a certain level, we do recommend that everybody start at the very strict keto level just to see what happens. Because even if you can tolerate a higher amount, you might have benefits at the very, very strict low amount that you don't experience when you are eating 80 grams or 100 grams. Things like no more brain fog, total, elimination of heartburn, just more energy. You just might feel better. Even if you can eat more carbs, you might choose not to. And I think there's a lot of people that have all kinds of weird little niggling symptoms that they don't even know they have until they're gone. So if you do the strict keto for 2 weeks or a month, like, hey, wait, my shoulder doesn't hurt anymore, or I haven't had a headache in a month, like things that people think are normal or they don't attribute to diet. So even though we're very clear that not everyone needs to do keto, we kind of push people toward at least starting there just to see what happens. And then it's up to them to decide, well, do I want to stay here for the rest of my life, or do I want to maybe eat a pear every now and then, or have a sweet potato once in a while. But we do, as much as we're trying to broaden the audience for this and get people that are never going to do strict keto, we make it clear that being at that level might be the best, and you really might have a lot of benefits that you're not going to get when you're higher.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned these things, you don't even realize these things are a problem. I mean, and this is just a weird observation that I've had. I haven't hiccuped in about 5 years. And I remember that was something that I would regularly, do periodically. And, the thought is it's some kind of diaphragmatic irritation and maybe inflammatory stuff setting up. But I mean, that's just a weird, it's clinically, no one's really going to care about that. No one's going to make that a subject of a research study, how much you hiccup or not. But I mean, just don't do it anymore. It's like, well, that's kind of weird. Eric, I want to ask you about, you said you could be in ketosis for basically continuously for years if you want to, no big deal. So a lot of people will say, well, it's very stressful on the body. It's going to drive cortisol levels up. What is the thought behind that? I mean, are you seeing that, in your clinical practice? I mean, do you assess for that? Is there any truth to this? This chronic elevation of cortisol is going to be a problem, and therefore, thus, you need to eat X amount of carbohydrates to ameliorate that or prevent that from happening?
Well, I haven't seen that, but I have to honestly say I haven't assessed it in great detail. So if there's any clinical manifestation of stress, these things get better. And the older I get, the more I shy away from blood levels of things, because you run into things like insulin resistance, where the level is really high because it doesn't work, right? You end up with other kinds of manifestations where the blood level. So when people focus on cortisol and blood levels and all this, and typically it's the short-term change. Like, so you could get a gout flare in the first couple weeks because the ketones compete with the uric acid for excretion. But then once you get over the gout flare, if you stay strict, you're not going to have gout. You're actually going to fix it. So, but some people will go on and off and on and off, and the ketosis will cause gout because you're going on and off and on and off. It's not the ketosis, it's the going on and off. So, but I have to honestly say, well, I've done this for 20 years, and I know a lot of people who worked for Dr. Atkins who've done this for 50 years. That's certainly not a cohort of thousands of people to get this FDA approved or get the imprimatur. So I am still like someone leaving Europe on a boat when they thought you would go off the edge of the earth. I'm if someone's up in the crow's nest looking out there to make sure we're not seeing anything that's dangerous, including, going off the edge of the earth. So, and I used that metaphor 20 years ago when I first started this, saying that everyone says we're going to kill people and everyone's going to be, no, I haven't seen that come true. But I have to say, because of the research limitation, we were hamstrung and we can't do the outcome studies because no one will fund it. And so yes, creativity for funding through GoFundMe or philanthropists, that's basically what we've been left with. And I don't know of any researcher in the NIH yet who is, open to this, because they need the money to flow from a group that says, yeah, this is great. There's still so many people who are afraid of it. But so, I can't say definitively that nutritional ketosis is great and healthier and all that, but I can tell you that I haven't seen all of the terrible things happening that everyone said would happen. And I don't really know about the cortisol because I don't measure it. And so where I am at now in the research and academic world is I've been asked to be guest editor for issues on the keto diet. So this last issue, published in October of this year, Current Opinions in Endocrinology and Diabetes, I asked Amber O'Hearn to write a paper on the carnivore diet. Does it provide all the essential nutrients? So you'll see an article in this journal on the carnivore, and she makes the case that it provides all the essential nutrients, but says also we don't have long-term studies in people yet. Those need to be done. So depending on the criticism, I just put it out there in an editorial in this journal in October that the burden of proof is on the other people to show that this is bad. At least the low carb, high fat studies that have been all out there. There are thousands of people in randomized controlled trials. And if you're going to say something's bad for cortisol down the road, no, you have to prove it. Because if it's based on a 1 week or a measurement or even a blood test, we know these things are not very reliable, and they can go up and down. And I mean, who knew, if you've been following Dave Feldman and the cholesterol code, and I know you have, but if some of your followers have, he came up to me on a event showing me all of these ups and downs of cholesterol all day long. And I just looked at him like, what are you doing? He said, well, look, doc, the blood cholesterol goes way up and down over the course of a day. I did, but nobody does that. He says, but look what happens when you do. And, you know, I said, well, keep doing what you're doing. I don't know what you're doing, but this is really interesting. And so to even have a method now that he created where you eat lots and lots of fat to drive down the cholesterol level, I mean, you know, again, the burden of proof is on you guys who say this is bad to prove it, because I've been listening to these criticisms for 20 years and they haven't come true.
Yeah, and that's one thing you know, when I went on Joe Rogan's podcast and said, hey, I don't know what labs are even useful, you know, everybody's like heads exploded, because I'm like, you know, I'm like, hey, I don't know. I mean, this is,
I don't know if I'll go that far, but no.
well, I mean, it's just, you know, it's just, we don't know. And I'll point to things like vitamin D. I mean, diurnal variation on vitamin D is 30% throughout the day. What time of day did you draw your vitamin D? I mean, if you drew it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it may be 20 points higher than if you drew it at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we get this stuff where it's just, you know, I agree with that on the lab stuff. And I like look in the damn mirror, you know, that's to me a reasonable assessment. Let me ask you about your experience, or both you guys, Amy and Eric. We do hear a lot, and Amy, you touched upon this. You need to eat the highest, finest quality from animals that were, you know, petted every day. And, you know, and I see guys like Ken Bear, hey, eat friggin' hot dogs and mustard. What works? I mean, have you seen just a significant difference in how we approach this, you know, clinically for, you know, because Eric, you've got people in North Carolina that don't have a ton of money, and hey, man, they can't afford $20 a pound for, you know, grass finished, so on and so forth. So what actually works on when the rubber meets the road, I guess?
Yeah, and you know, I've learned from my patients, as you know, if you're a doctor who's listening, you'll learn. And so while I don't do these things, I've watched other people do it. And so this one young man who only ate at McDonald's off the dollar menu, and he figured out that if he had 2 or 3 double cheeseburgers, no bun, no fries, no sugar in the soda, he was losing 10 to 15 pounds per month in a healthy manner. You know, that is on the higher end, but he was younger and active. But I've seen people eat at a variety of grocery stores, from the you know, cheapest ones to the fanciest ones, and it's usually the fancier ones that have a lot of the carbs, and because that's kind of or even the vegetarian options. So it doesn't matter where you buy the food. People go to the farmer's market and you know, use their food dollar to try to change the politics of food, which is great. But if I required someone to have the high-end food quality, I would lose probably 2/3 of the people that I treat. They just wouldn't come back. I mean, I can't, you know, it's too expensive. Although now that when you get to the food bank, it's pretty much all carbs. So it's hard to teach someone. So, you know, I never knew what a Vienna or Vienna sausage was. It's basically a canned meat. It's kind of, you know, it's like Spam, but it's in like a sausage, and it's really popular here in North Carolina. So are pork rinds and fatback and all the soul foods that were poor folk food, but that's what fixes you. So again, I think the major issue is the blood sugar, getting that down and controlled, and the insulin as a function of that. Now that I'm still kind of holding out that the omega-3, omega-6 concept lacks proof. And I know that this is in the keto world, I'm a heretic, because I don't really know if you have to worry about omega-3 and omega-6. Now you can change an animal a little bit by having them eat something differently, but it's still no carbs. And there are some people who are not clinical who kind of have this as their bully pulpit, and you can't argue with them because they have a fixed belief about it. But I have a lot of people who have great success, fix diabetes, lose weight in a healthy manner, and they're not paying attention to the vegetable oils and the finished meat and Kerrygold butter. And I mean, so I don't know. I think there should be a range of options. And what we do in End Your Carb Confusion is teach people the basic principle so that they can choose to do this in any manner that they want. So if we came up with a food plan that was something you could only get at Trader Joe's or something like that, then you're going to miss out on so many people.
Yeah, and I think, and I think Amber Hearn again, and I know you'd mentioned her, and I've read Amber's paper, and the conclusion was calcium might be a problem, but other than that, it seems to be pretty well covered. But she rightly pointed out and showed me, hey, a lot of these omega-3, omega-6 ratio assumptions are based on population studies where we just kind of assume it was that, the Japanese eat more fish, the Inuit ate more fish, and they were healthier, and therefore it's got to be omega-3 to 6. But in reality, it's maybe they weren't eating as much food. Maybe they were eating low carb, and it's just that. And we just kind of sort of, I think I remember I had a discussion with Paul Mason a couple of years ago, and I said, hey, I don't know about this omega-3, 6, if there's anything there. Maybe eating, tons of processed food where most of us get our soybean oil and our canola oil. Maybe that is a problem, or it might be other compounds that are produced when you produce some of these seed oils versus is it the omega-6? We don't know, because omega-6 are required, right? I mean, it's a required nutrient, and we have to have it. And to say that getting it from a pig or getting it from a nut is somehow inherently bad for humans, you got to wonder on that.
It's important to consider who the source of information is. Who's giving the information. There are people who want to find the perfect human diet, right? The biohackers, the ones who are gonna go on the hope and prayer that something might happen in the future, and they'll make a change now. And then there are those of us who say, well, if you want to do that, that's fine, but I'm not gonna prescribe a drug saying, this is going to work. I need more evidence than that. And so the omega-3, omega-6, I have seen years ago where the membrane fluidity changes, and it was an animal study, and one of my respected peers was involved and believes in this is really important. The issue is not that it happened, it's how important is it? The issue is the magnitude of the effect. So if you can show it in a Petri dish, and yes, okay, that's true, but there's so many different layers to go through to say that it has human relevance that knowing the investigator who did the study, that's not going to care. He's not going to care. He's in search of the perfect human diet and thinks he has it. And I require a little more evidence than that.
Yeah, I think that's, because we do have so many mechanistic studies, rat studies, in vitro studies. We can show a metabolic mechanism all day long, but then we're like, well, guess what? There's probably 75 compensatory mechanisms that affect that. And what is the clinical outcome in humans? And it's hard to do. As you know, you don't get to, with rat studies, at the end of the study, all the rats are killed, you cut them open, you look at whatever. You don't do that on human studies, or at least you don't do it anymore. I think that became illegal at some point. Maybe out of the 1940s Nazi Germany, but so it's very, very difficult. And, I guess the long-term clinical outcomes. I mean, like when somebody shows me, somebody showed me a study, it was like, we're going to look at grass-finished beef and we're going to compare it to kangaroo meat, or grain-finished beef versus kangaroo meat. And the outcome metric was postprandial inflammation. And I was like, okay, but what does that actually mean in the long term? I mean, when I exercise, there's inflammation. When you eat anything, there's some level of inflammation. Is it inherently bad or not? We don't know the answer to that. There's people that try to, they try to extrapolate this little piece of data into all of human health, which is, I think very
well, the reason for extrapolating is usually $1 is made off that, So again,
can I just
consider the source of information.
Yeah, I just want to comment too, Shawn, you said something earlier that, the anxiety that all this stuff induces in people. Well, what about this, this IL-6 after I eat, or, this prostaglandin, leukotriene, whatever. And the whole point of these ways of eating, and by that I mean any form of carb, whether it's carnivore or keto or just general low carb, this is supposed to make your life easier and more convenient. And the beauty of these ways of eating is that you don't have to weigh and measure and track. And listen, I love to eat. I love food. I am never, ever going to sit down with a spreadsheet at my dinner table. I'm just not going to do it. If you like that, some people love the data, do it. But the whole beauty of these ways of eating is that it's supposed to remove the need for that. If you just eat a damn steak, like you say, or just don't eat the damn carbs, like we say, you shouldn't. It's supposed to lessen the anxiety. If this way of eating is making you more scared and more fearful and more anxious, that's the opposite of what it's supposed to do, right? I see Brett here. Brett's a big fan. Bacon and burger patties. Like, why are we making this so complicated? You know, we worry about every little detail, and the stress and the work. What is the point of having good physical health and looking like a Greek god if you are miserable and scared and worried and terrified all the time? What is the point of that? The point of these ways of eating is to make this easier. No more points, no more numbers, no more counting, just eat food.
Yeah, that's a great thing, and it kind of reminds me. And I think you remember when I interviewed Mark Sisson a while back, and we were talking about these wearables, these feedback gadgets, the Aura rings and the heart rate variability monitor. He goes, man, if I got to depend on that to make me happy, just shoot me.
Yes.
Because I mean, our happiness should not depend upon what our current LDL level is, or what our Aura ring score is, and if we do it, it's just kind of taking us away from humanity. I think that's a great point you make there. I want to just I know, I know, Eric, that David Ludwig is doing a carnivore study with Belinda Leonards, and I know when I talked to him recently, I said they've got 2,000 plus participants. They've got 500 people in labs. But one of the things I asked him was, hey, just ask people grain-fed, grass-fed, characterize it. So maybe we'll have a little bit of data. My sort of assessing, and I've done surveys on 12,000 of these guys, not much difference, in the outcome. But one thing I want to ask about, and this is something, Amy, we're all human. We're all gonna fall off the wagon. We're all gonna, eat the peanut butter or the almond butter, whatever you like. I know that was one of your things, and we all do that. But so let's just say you do. What do we do to mitigate? I mean, like I said, it's fine. We're all human beings. You have an issue, you beat yourself up on it, or what are your weapons to just sort of like, hey, I'm gonna do a little bit more exercise tomorrow, go for a walk. How do we deal with it? Like knowing that we're all human and we're infallible, and I tell people, you're not going to wake up suddenly and all the junk food's going to be gone. I mean, you've got to navigate this world, and it's arguably just getting worse and worse. As you get, what do you get? Reese's Pieces flavored cereal now, and I mean, it's just crazy what they've got out there for people. It's like fake food being modified, being sort of emulated in other fake food, and it's just crazy. So how do you, let's just say you're on your thing, and then all of a sudden you go to a wedding and you just stuff your face with birthday cake or wedding cake and eat all the things on the thing. What do you do then?
Well, so all right, I'll
go first.
A couple of things that we say. I mean, the first thing is the every once in a while thing like that is not that big a deal. No, we didn't become obese and diabetic as a society because of pigging out at Thanksgiving. The problem is that we eat like it's Thanksgiving every single day of the year. If you have one piece of cake once in a while, move on. You don't have to fast to make up for it. It's not a sin you have to atone for with an hour on the elliptical machine. But I will steal Dr. Westman's thunder. We have a line in our book that he uses with his patients. If you want to indulge, now, I know a lot of these carnivore followers are very adamant. If you never, ever want to eat anything that's not meat, great, but not everyone's going to be there. And if you do have a treat or whatever, don't let a holiday become a hollow week or a hollow month. If you have one little thing, you don't have to pray for forgiveness. You don't have to atone. Move on immediately, right back on plan. But if you know yourself and you know that it's never going to be just the one little thing, it's going to be the one little thing and then 50 more little things. And before you know it, you've regained 80 pounds, then you can. you really have to know yourself. But those little slips now and then are not the end of the world if you keep them to isolated once in a while things. Again, the problem is that we were eating this crap all day long, every day.
I guess two things I want to just kind of address. I know, like, I interviewed Nadir Ali a while ago. You guys know Nadir, he's a cardiologist. It's totally switched on to the low carb, high fat, meat based, whatever. And he talks about there's people that really, and Eric, you probably met them, people that really, really, I mean, they've been so glucose, carbohydrate dependent. They've got such brittle metabolic disease, for a lack of term. It's very difficult for them to transition into the low carb issue. How do you deal with those people? How do you break through? Because some people just effortlessly get into this quote unquote fat adapted state, where other people, I mean, their energy is just struggling. It may take them months and months. Are there any sort of things to facilitate those people making that transition easier or quicker, perhaps?
Yeah, and if you assume there's no medical condition that needs like medication deprescribing, that diabetes, high blood pressure medicines can become too strong really fast. If you just take someone without, otherwise healthy person, usually it's a lack of salt, and everyone's been taught not to have salt. So we hammer that home pretty quickly, that you need to be sure you have enough salt. And the bouillon is an easy way to have salt. It doesn't have to be pink Himalayan but anyway, the transition, there's an interesting phenomenon I see, that if someone, I hear what Dr. Ali said, and since he's relatively new to this, it might not have occurred to him yet, that the worst sugar addicts are the ones who develop diabetes. The worst sugar addicts are the ones who have metabolic syndrome and can't get off the sugar. And so it makes sense that they have a hard time getting off it, because they're the worst ones. So it's like saying, well, I do 4-pack-a-day smokers that have trouble quitting smoking. Well, because they're the most addicted. So I think my message of total abstinence, and we address that in End Your Carb Confusion. We address that some people just have to realize that it's an addiction, and that you have to give up the sugar. But the mainstream folks, and even in my area, in my clinic, they go see someone else, and they, oh, well, you can have some carbs. No, my approach is, no way. No, you're an addict. You can't go back. Now, for most people, every now and then treat, like Amy said, is swine. But I've seen people lose 50 pounds over the summer, getting into this time of year, Thanksgiving, and then they regain it all by the time they get through to January, New Year's, and of course there's Thanksgiving and Christmas, New Year's, and then Easter. They wake up saying, how did it all come back on? One last way to have people not relapse, or if you want to use addiction language, is you get them really interested in things like beef brisket. I mean, so I realized this summer, when we had to do a lot of carry out and all that, I could live on beef brisket and collard greens. I mean, this is just a Southern treat with, there's a lot of fat on the brisket itself, and so getting the treats in the carnivorous sort of world, sugar is baby stuff. That's kid stuff. So we do work on the psychology of this all. Yeah, you don't want to have that Reese's Pieces cereal. They still make that, really? Got to lead people down this path.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right. Brisket is fun. It's definitely a big project for someone, to make one correctly, because there's a whole, it's like an all-day project to really do it.
I found the one store in our area that has the perfect one. So you may have to shop around a little bit, and
no, he's talking about making it yourself.
Yeah, I know.
Which you're never going to do. But so we have, North Carolina, we've got like the Southern barbecue brisket. I come from a Jewish family, and so I grew up with like the Jewish style brisket, which is really different. But I need to make him one of those, because I think he's only ever had the smoked kind of Southern style, which they're both delicious, but the Jewish is very different.
Well, my sort of biases the Texas style. I think Texas has got, anyway, I lived there for 20 years. So I'm partial to the Texas style brisket, which is quite good.
I like that too.
Yeah. I know there's some arguments about North Carolina style barbecue and, but again, that's the sauce. It's the vinegar base versus the other one, the other one. So let me just, addiction, because that is there are people say there's no such thing as sugar addiction. There's no such thing as carbohydrate addiction. Do we, I guess it's the eye of the beholder. How do you define addiction? What is the science? Is there science that actually says, yes, this is a problem? Most people say, yes, there's alcoholism. Yes, there's cocaine addiction. Yes, there's heroin addiction. But when it comes to sugar, there's kind of some mixed messaging in there.
Well, are you going to wait until a doctor organization is going to say it's the AMA only recently, in the last 6-7 years has said obesity was a disease. No, but the science is pretty clear. You define an addiction, that there's a withdrawal syndrome. You crave what you're not having. And I have to divulge that my first 10 years of research was doing nicotine and smoking addiction research. And so I've talked to a lot of people who are quitting smoking. There's a defined withdrawal syndrome. They crave it and then it goes away. And Joan Ifland, Ifland, has the first textbook on food addiction. And yes, it's mostly sugar and carbs. Of course, some people can be addicted to other food, the quantity and all, but having a textbook in this field, she's a PhD, is the start toward recognition about something like this. But you have a withdrawal syndrome, you crave it when you don't eat it. You don't have to have sugar. It's not like it's a biologic necessity. It fits all the criteria for an addictive drug. And then you read like Gary Taubes's The Case Against Sugar, his book, 100 years ago, 120 years ago now, sugar was regarded as a drug because of the effects it has. And you look at people who have it, it sure looks like a drug. So it's a drug addiction, and even though it's in food a lot. And yeah, there is a sugar addiction, whether it's widely known or not. There's no DSM, like psychiatry code for it yet, if you wanted to wait to that level. But just the biologic phenomenon of it, it's pretty clear that it's addictive for some people, not everyone. So
if I can add real quick, for me, the addiction is not, there are the technical definitions of the withdrawal and all that. The thing that hits home most for me in defining addiction is continued use despite harm. This thing is hurting you, it makes you feel bad, and you keep using it anyway. You don't even want to, it's hurting you, but you cannot stop. That's an addiction. The only people who think sugar is not an addiction are people who don't have a sugar addiction. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not addicted to gambling. I believe you can be addicted to gambling. You can be addicted to alcohol and pornography. Just because I'm not, why should I disbelieve someone who says, I keep doing this thing, I know it's really bad for me, I hate that I do it, but I can't stop? Who am I to say, well, that's not real? And the sugar addiction, frankly, we have testimonials in our book. We have success stories from people. We have stories from people that had terrible binge eating. These are the people who have wrappers hiding in the trunk of their car because they're ashamed. They don't want their family to see how much junk food they're eating. They've got burger wrappers all over the bottom of the car, or in their briefcase, in their desk drawer. If that's not addiction, I don't know what is. So we can argue about definition. Like Dr. Westman says, do you believe in gravity? Gravity is still a theory. It's still a theory. Do you need to have that proof? If you're addicted to sugar, it. You don't need a doctor to diagnose you.
Yeah, and I think your point about alcohol. Yes, alcoholism exists. I think most people would agree. I can have a glass of wine once in a while, and I'm not, and I still, like I said, I still believe there are alcoholics out there. I think that's a very, very nice analogy there. So great stuff. Okay, let me just, because we're getting long here. This book, End Your Carb Confusion. Where can you get it? Is it available? Why is this a preprint, or is this out? Is this available for everybody to pick up now? And then tell us, I know you guys have social media type stuff, to get more information.
Yeah, it's pre-ordering right now. That is, of course, we sent you an advance copy, Shawn, because you deserve it. And the release date is December 15th. But I've learned that this is really my first kind of solo book. I had Jimmy Moore and the Atkins team on several books before. They really have stressed to us that pre-sales are important. I don't know if they talked to you about that too. Victory Belt's a great publisher, and they've guided us so don't wait until December 15th, although that's when it'll be on the bookshelves. And any bookseller, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, will be able to, you'll have it available there.
Yeah, there's a link. Someone has put the link to our Amazon in the chat, and our websites and stuff. Yeah, this is the book. This is not a proof copy. This is the book. It's just they sent it, to some select individuals like yourself, Shawn. But it is, available for pre-order. But it's hot off the press. This is it. This isn't like the one that hasn't been proofread that still has typos. This is it.
Great. And I guess we have a book club, and I know Amanda, if we can link this on our website, on the MeatRx website, for people, we have a list of, books that people might be interested in. So that'll help to get that going there. And then as far as social media links for you guys, I know, Amy, you're on Twitter and I guess Instagram a little bit. And Eric, I know you're not much on social media. If I'm thinking, I know you do a little bit of Twitter stuff, but I guess you can kind of share those for the people that
Sure.
want to follow you guys.
Yeah, well, I'm trying more and more. I'm directing people toward Adapt Your Life, ADAPTYOURLIFE, adaptyourlife.com, because yes, we do have some consumables, little keto bars and all that, but we just launched a digital masterclass for the first time. And so Adapt Your Life Academy is where I like people to take a look. adaptyourlifeacademy.com. We just launched the masterclass Keto Made Simple, and it's 12 lectures, 2 hours of, brief 10, 15-minute chalk talks with slides, and I give them, and the team worked really, it's a lot of work to do something like this, but adaptyourlifeacademy.com is a place to check that out.
Yeah, and Eric, I want to just say the last public speaking engagement I've been able to do was your Adapt Your Life thing in up here in California. I think it was in March, right before everything got locked down.
It was Long Beach.
Yeah, that Long Beach. That was the last time I've done any speaking. So hopefully one of these days we'll get back there and do stuff live. And then Amy, what about your social media?
So yeah, I am on Twitter. My handle is Tuit Nutrition. It's TUIT Nutrition, and that's also the name of my YouTube channel, Tuit Nutrition. And somebody put a link to my website in the chat, so you can check that out there. And I'm on Instagram also under Tuit Nutrition, but I don't use it that much. I'm much more a writer than I am a picture person. But just search everywhere for Tuit Nutrition, and that'll be me.
All right, thank you guys very much.
One last thought, if I could.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Of course, Eric.
Briefly, for those in your family, relatives, and all that who think you're crazy for doing this, think of the book, the End Your Carb Confusion, as sort of like the crumb that will get people down this path. Okay, so it's a gentle introduction to the concept. It's approachable. There's no right or wrong and preaching in it. And I've found over time that it's better to lead and then gently coax some people down in this direction, and so it would be a great gift for others. Even if you don't have to be persuaded. I certainly have, I had these people in my family in mind as we were writing it.
Yeah, that's great, and it's great that you write it in an accessible way. I think so many people try to one up somebody with the science and how many references and how sciencey they can sound, and really some of it is just, I just need a straightforward, easy, accessible, write it at 8th grade level thing. I try to do that with my book to some degree, and hopefully, and I've just been skimming through it, and I see the same sort of approach here, and I think most people appreciate it. You don't have to have a PhD to read a book, anyway, thanks for you guys for coming on. You have a great day. I've got a ribeye sitting in the sous vide right now.
Nice.
I'm going to have that with my 8 eggs and bacon and cheese omelet for breakfast. So anyway, you guys have a great day. Thanks again for coming
Thanks.
on.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All
Always
right.
a pleasure.
And we'll
Thanks.
see everybody out tomorrow, perhaps. Okay. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.